Greetings, dear friends! I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Cherry Tiggo T11. Up to 50,000 in standard operation, the car usually passes without any repairs, but usually 100 can no longer withstand. Knocking and build-up begin. Basically, they are responsible for ball bearings. They are floating silent blocks in the rear suspension and the thrust bearings in the front. Then the nuisances begin. So incompatibility of spare parts is a common thing. For example, according to the catalog, the silent block is 61 mm, but in reality it costs 60 mm. This happens all the time. So break-up bushings in the rear suspension are also a common misfortune for everyone. In combination with rather weak levers, you can get an expensive repair even though the suspension as a whole is still in order. Break-up bolts in the front so less. The resource of the outer ball joints of the rear levers is very dependent on the loads and the amount of dirt on the road, and their price is rather big. As a result, they are often converted into simple silent blocks. The service life of wheel bearings with original wheels is quite acceptable. They withstand 100 to 150,000 mileage, if you do not put on large wheels and do not drive off-road. Finally, the good news. Almost all suspension elements are compatible with those from the first three generations of the RIAV4, and in different ways. For details, what from what and where it fits, it is better to contact experienced owners. The steering rack has moderate reliability, by 200 plus mileage. There will be knocks for sure. Leaks are less likely, but they do happen. Installation of PTFE bushings and bulkhead usually helps. So far, Chinese manufacturers are not doing very well in hydraulics, and the high-pressure pipes are crimped so-so, and the pressure sensor in the line flows, like on Logan. And all resistant rubber after 5 years of operation already fails quite often, and oiling the pipes and the level of fluid in the power steering must be monitored in both directions. All the oil is odd, very viscous and problematic in winter, better to pour regular Dextron-free compatible fluids from decent suppliers. Well, the pipes themselves can be found new from more budgetary Chinese manufacturers, the same Lifan. They also copied the Rafik, so the connecting dimensions often coincide. The pump is surprisingly strong. It can even work in steam for an hour and not die at all. But it's also inexpensive, so it is easy to replace it if there are problems. The CV joint resource is not very large, but there are many different options. They differ for different motors and boxes, and the catalog and VIN do not help at all. There is confusion. When replacing, for correctness, it is necessary to count the splines. However, one can indirectly understand by the diameter of the drive shaft. There is a 30 spline for 25 mm, and if the size is 27 mm, then there are 25 splines. Antennas from NIO are often installed. They are even better than the Chinese original. The suspension of the rear gearbox on all-wheel drive vehicles is rather weak. It surrenders to 100 to 150 hundredths of mileage, especially among fans of off-road driving and towing trailers. And the price of such elements unexpectedly bites, so collective farming is a common thing here, since the silent blocks are the simplest round ones. Boxes of all series are strong enough. Most of the problems are associated with the scorched clutches and their low resource. At best with engines of 2.0 to 2.4 liters on the front drive. They stay at 150 plus thousand kilometers, and then replacing the clutch. Release and the basket with the disc assembly. Cars with 4-wheel drive and off-road trips had a resource of half at best, while EU's original kit is inexpensive, no need to experiment. With 1.6 engines, the resource is much less. Often it did not reach 100 even on the front-wheel drive, but then again, the complete kit is inexpensive. Less common are exhausted melted or simply source selector cables and problems with open roller bearings of the primary and secondary shafts, and also leaks and water getting into the box. In general, it is recommended to check the oil level regularly with more than 50,000 runs and listen to the car for the characteristic howl. Bearings are inexpensive, and the shafts themselves usually do not suffer. For those who like to sleep, the differential is dying, but at least without special effects and the exit of the satellite axis through the body. It simply breaks off the teeth and starts scratching. If you stop in time, then there are great chances to just wash and sort out the box without replacing the shafts and gears. Synchronizers just don't work right from the start, so if you like fast shit, then you shouldn't buy a Chinese car. The bulk of cars before restyling with automatic transmission have a French DP0G box, almost the same as on the Duster, and not only. After restyling, it was changed to a 1 Li Yang variator. Plus, occasionally there are cars with a robotic automatic transmission. The rarest exclusive Tiggo with 2.4 and 4-speed gearbox from Mitsubishi. You won't be able to tell something new about DP0 in the Chinese version under the designation QR425. This is the same old automatic gearbox that the French made, having bought a license from good German 01N boxes, reworking it completely and creating an AD series box, and then screwing at an electronically controlled valve body to it. An early forced blocking of the gas turbine engine and a cooling system with a heat exchanger. As a result, a good mechanical part is adjacent to a not very successful superstructure of hydraulics and electrics, and even everything is seasoned with constant overheating and a low resource of the gas turbine engine linings and filter. And also, high chances of oil contamination, wear of solenoids and oil pump, crumbled washers in the mechanical part and bending of the valve body plate with pressure leaks. On the Tiggo, the heat exchanger is very small and weak, but there is a factory tuning, a radiator from cars with a 2.4 automatic transmission, where the cooling system works through a heat exchanger in a cold radiator tank. However, getting rid of the problem with overheating of the box and leaks of the T of the cooling system to the heat exchanger with such tuning on the Tiggo, they risk getting another trouble, the ingress of antifreeze into the ATF, since the radiator is here with unreliable seals. In general, it is better to just put an additional radiator on the automatic transmission, since it does not need a large one. If you often change the oil and repair the gas turbine engine in time, then the output will simply be a not very well functioning 4-speed automatic transmission, cheap and easy to repair. In addition to overheating, there are also solenoid wedges, speed sensor failures, and selector failures. But in general, everything is not so bad. It is interesting that the Chinese version of the automatic transmission does not have any special differences in quality compared to the French one. Perhaps because the box for Tiggo is made by Chinese DFM, which is a licensee and partner of PSA in China. It also produces boxes and spare parts for it and for European cars. The QR019CHA CVT developed by Wan Li Yang is pretty strong. And, what is nice, it is supported by the domestic software CVT Z50, which allows you to easily and quickly diagnose the condition of the variators Jatco, Toyota, Honda, and just Wan Li Yang. But, like any variator, finishing it off to 100,000 mileage is not such a big deal. The combination of high loads, slippage, cold and dirty oil loads works wonders. It would seem that the oil is cheap, like SP3, change every 40,000, and with a good probability the main problem before 200 plus runs will be the failure of the speed sensors and wiring. But there are few thrifty people among Tiggo Waldorf. They managed to finish off the solenoids, the gas turbine engine, and the cones with a belt long before the calculated mileage. Do not count on a contract variator. If anything happens, they are not. Fortunately, this unit is not very difficult to repair, the design is convenient. Only 4 solenoids, a strong separator plate, and a good oil pump. The belt is a regular Bosch, a minimum of manuals, many incompatible sensors, and very few specialists in it. However, the design is intuitive and does not require complex equipment for repair. The main thing is not to knock down the stroke settings or the 2 pre-installed spools in the valve body, otherwise there will be a mismatch in the performance characteristics, and the settings of the timing gear radius of the belt will be violated. And besides, to monitor the condition of the oil pump and its pressure-reducing valve, it suffers greatly here due to the presence of metal dust in the oil. In addition to full-fledged automatic machines, Tiggo also has a simple robot, not the most successful and strongly abused by all option, which was very quickly taken out of production. Almost all of them have been converted to the usual mechanics by now. Four-wheel drive cars are few in the population, just over 10% of the total. For a long time, from 2008 to 2011, the car was generally sold only in a front-wheel drive version, and there is an explanation for that. The original design with the location of the rear axle engagement clutch separate from the rear gearbox turned out to be a failure. Strong vibrations on the move could not be defeated either by changing the fastening of the coupling bracket or by replacing the shafts. Cars after the 2012 model year already have a clutch built into the final drive of the rear axle, and they have no problems with vibration. The Borg-Warner clutch itself is simple and cheap, but not very reliable due to the lack of torque reserve and tightness. Cadence shafts and outboard bearing do not differ in excessive quality. By 100,000, they begin to suffer from wear and tear on the crosses and suspension. In general, an all-wheel drive car becomes noticeably more difficult to maintain, and this is not a favorite in this class. The history of the model is divided in two stages. At first, the model was equipped only with licensed copies of Mitsubishi 4G63 or 4G69 SOHC engines. Then they began to install motors of their own line of Acteco 1.8 Weld. After that, they completely switched to their own motors by the time the Tiggo 3 appeared. But whatever motor is under the hood, you need to remember that the quality of the wiring and electrical is terrible, and the radiators and the design are very specific. It is enough to look at the ugly build-up of the filter neck, which servicemen love to break off. A few flattering words should be said about thermostats, hoses, nozzles, and even radiator flattering and radiator fan motors. After 5 to 6 years of operation, failures due to the fault of the periphery are noticeable, more frequent, and become a real problem. The very first Tiggos were powered by Mitsubishi licensed engines, which were very popular in China in the 2000s. 2.4 129 HP motor is 4G64S4M, and the 2.0 115 HP motor 4G63S4M, almost like the original Mitsubishi. The main disadvantages in the form of the design, with a very problematic assembly of the balancer shaft in the block and the thin drive belt of the second balancer, as well as weak hydraulic compensators. The motors inherited from their ancestors. So the wear of the balancer shaft bushings, the breakage of a small belt and the subsequent breakage of the timing belt and the knock of the hydraulics are all diseases of the progenitor, aggravated by the low quality of both belts and lined with hydraulic compensators made in China. The engines are generally good and easy to maintain. They are shown good belts, rollers, frequent timing control, as well as the removal of the balance shaft with the installation of oil channel plugs and the revision of the oil pump. It is a pity that the Chinese quality brings its own adjustment to the general opinion about the engine. So, the stretching cylinder head bolts and simply weak connecting rod exhaust valves that are not very resistant to overheating, and the poor quality of the many minor parts like the rocker arms, oil pump and crankshaft liners and balance shafts can greatly complicate the life of Tiggo owners. Well, ignition coils, candles and sensors will compare it for sure. With all this, the piston group itself is usually quite reliable. Such cars have chances of leaving 400 to 500,000 before overall, but you need either amazing luck so that the motor is perfectly assembled from the factory, or high quality maintenance with the replacement of all elements important for the design. Own motors under the Acteco brand were developed by the Austrian company AVL under the requirements of Cherry. At least 4 members of this family are known to have been installed on the Tiggo. First of all, these are a couple of 1.8 CQRE481FC and 1.6 CQRE481F or FD, which are structurally almost identical and differ only in piston size. The youngest of this pair is almost never seen, but there is a formerly related 1.6 of a different design with a CQRE4G16 index. In theory, a 2.0 CQR484 F series motor is possible on the late Tiggo 3, but in practice there are no cars with it either. The design of all these motors is noticeably more modern than that of licensed Japanese ones. These are lightweight long-stroke engines with a simpler timing without any balances, variable intake, electronic chokes, and collectors. The cylinder block for engines 1.8 and both 1.6 is cast iron, and for 2.0 engines it is aluminum with cast iron liners. Their design is based on completely modern European solutions from Bosch and Valeo, which allows them to achieve European environmental requirements. I am glad that in this case there was no unnecessary complication in the mechanical part. By the way, a certain influence of the Mitsubishi design school is also felt. There are oil pumps coaxial with the crankshaft, the design of the cylinder block, and in the cylinder head there is a similarity to the 4G63. At least a similar design of the lubricant supplied to the camshafts, and their very design with stops and a 24 hexagon for ease of service. Weld motors 1.8 and 2.0 are not champions in terms of the piston group resource. After 120 to 150,000 run, they can eat up oil, especially if you're pour anything and change every 15,000, according to the regulations. But the piston on them is old-fashioned, heavy with a long skirt and a circle. In the end, in most cases, everything can be solved by replacing the rings. The price of a set for 4 cylinders is only 800 rubles. Or simply by decaulking. The resource of the piston pin and crankshaft is over 300,000, unless a defective liner is caught or the oil pump fails. In general, this is a fairly conservative and quite sturdy motor. The quality of the factory assembly is quite high, and the design has no tricky features that require complex procedures for repair or simply assembly, except perhaps the timing design. The main of engines 1.8 and 2.0 is the unstable resource of the rollers and the pump, a broken timing bell, as well as cranking it due to improper replacement. The factory set does not always pass the desired 60,000 kilometers. The main problem is with the tension and parasitic rollers. Here the plastic breaks and the tensioning mechanism is unreliable, and the parasitic also has a wedge bearing. You need to keep track of both, and it is better to change it every 40,000 kilometers for guarantee, if we are talking about original components. Unfortunately, a high-quality timing belt does not give guarantees. With frequent belt replacements, service errors begin to affect. The timing design is keyless, with a tapered fit, and the installation is carried out using a template plate and a crankshaft stopper. In the absence of equipment, as well as the use of old or simply poor quality bolts, tightening without a torque range, the risk of errors or damage to the cylinder head, as well as breakdowns of the camshafts, are very high. Owners of Tiggo, admittedly, turn mainly to cheap services. When the valves hit the pistons at high revs, it can tighten the piston rings, which will increase the cost of expensive repairs by the cost of the pistons. They are inexpensive here, about as in the VAZ. But in any case, these are extra parts and work. However, the pistons are often filled, and the motor becomes plugless. Another significant problem is the resource of the valve springs and the valves themselves. From the factory, the selection of springs is imperfect. A large spread in elasticity is noticeable even on new motors. As a result, there is a good chance of quick burnout of the valves. The valves themselves are also imperfect. The bushing and valve stem wear out quickly. As a result, by 150,000, the plates can begin to break off. The valves can dry out on the go and the springs break off. Pistons in this situation are usually also destroyed. Minor problems with ignition coils, throttle, engine mounts, wiring and oil leaks are expected and do not present any particular difficulties, as well as the breakdown of the VKG system. From the funny nuances, since there are no analog spare parts from Japanese motors, unlike the old 2.0 and 2.4, the problem with the selection of parts rises in full growth. At the minimum, you constantly have to solve puzzles regarding the quality of the pump and timing rollers, as well as the elements of the drive belt for additional units. And here surprises are possible. For example, pumps from China can be several times cheaper and better than the store's original. Mechanically identical parts cost completely different amounts, and better made ones can cost less. The 1.6 CQRE 4G 16 engine differ markedly in design. First of all, the fact that they have a chain timing belt and with phase regulators, and this significantly reduces the likelihood of unexpected problems, although the resource of the chains is far from a record. But even 120,000 kilometers of stability and a clear crackle during wear is more than decent by the standards of fine Chinese car industry. Moreover, you can often pull with the replacement of the chain itself. Replacing the dampers will allow you to drive another 60,000 without unnecessary noise. True. Further, the chances of replacing the stars in terms of wear increase greatly. But the price of the timing kit is less than 100 euros, so you do not need to save that much. Of the obvious disadvantages, a smaller resource of the piston group, without participation in the timing process, like belt 1.8. With 200 plus mileage, there is usually already noticeable wear on the cylinders and rings. In addition, these 1.6 do not heat well due to unsuccessful implementation of the cooling system. Moreover, the circulation of antifreeze through the stove is also very weak until it warms up completely. As a result, the car in frosts from 10 turns into a refrigerator for a good 20 to 30 minutes, even under load. And the fuel consumption in winter increases greatly, since the common absolute pressure and temperature sensor at negative temperatures become overgrown with oil condensate from the VKG system, sharply reducing the accuracy of the ICE control system. In regions with regular cold temperatures from -30, this is already a serious problem. But otherwise it is the most successful engine on this model, unless it is even less powerful than the 1.8, and in comparison with the crossover with the 2.4 engine, the car becomes really slow, despite the seemingly close maximum power. On this, information about the problems of Cherry Tiggo T11 is exhausted. If you know more, or do not agree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.